This is not a review bomb. This is not a review bomb. This is a review bomb? There is no official definition of the phrase review bomb, and it's currently used by gamers and game journalists alike to mean at least two, honestly, pretty much mutually exclusive different things. And frankly, it's time to stop. Let's break down what these two definitions are, why it's actually a pretty big problem that we confuse them together, and what we can try and do to solve this super duper omega serious issue of slightly confusing gamer words. It's generally agreed by all definitions that a review bomb is when there is a sudden increase in negative reviews for a game. But it's the reason for those reviews that is debated. People generally fall into one of two camps. In one camp, a sudden increase of negative reviews for any reason is considered a review bomb. And in the other camp, a sudden increase in negative reviews for off-topic reasons only is considered to be a review bomb. For example, when a developer makes an unpopular political statement on social media, so people respond by dropping a wave of negative reviews as a sort of punishment for that statement, whilst making no attempt to actually share their feelings about the game that is being reviewed. There's also a second dimension to consider, being whether those reviews were part of some sort of organized brigading effort to hurt the game. And then arguably there's a third dimension on top of that, where we have to consider whether review bomb is negative or positive reviews. But we'll talk about those later. And to make things a little clearer from this point on, I'm going to refer to all combinations of these factors as AREs. Anomalous review events. Anytime that there's a sudden influx of reviews, positive or negative, for any reason at all, off topic or otherwise, it is an anomalous review event. A neutral term that you hopefully have no prior definitions for in your conscious or your subconscious. Back in mid-2023, during a brief break from revealing real-world military secrets on their forums, players of the game War Thunder engaged in a negative anomalous review event, when the developers of the game took a brief break of their own from sponsoring YouTube videos, and they released an update changing the game's economy in a way which made a lot of people very angry and was widely regarded as a bad move. These negative reviews were made as a direct response to the negative experience of playing the game at the time. These reviews were a genuine message to other players, clearly stating that this is the experience you will receive if you play the game right now, and they were a message to the developers saying, "We, your players, do not like these changes." On the flip side, one of the most famous anomalous review events ever in gaming was when Campo Santo, the developers of Firewatch, declared that they would be copyright striking PewDiePie's videos where he plays their game, because of the infamous bridge incident where he dropped a racial slur. And the developers, as a result, didn't want to be associated with him. Many people disagreed with Campo Santo using the YouTube copyright system in this way, so they decided to leave negative reviews on Firewatch as a form of protesting the developer's actions. This is clearly nothing to do with the game itself. It is a complete outside factor that would not in any way change your experience of actually playing the game at the time. And the message to the developers wasn't, "We don't like your game," it was just, "We don't like you." Both of these scenarios resulted in an unusually high number of negative reviews in a short period of time. But the reason and apparent justification for those reviews could hardly be more different. Regardless of what you might have felt the term review bomb meant before starting this video, I'm sure we can all agree that these are two ultimately very different situations, and using the same term to describe both of them is confusing at best and outright harmful at worst. Because by allowing both scenarios to be called review bombs without any further clarification, we allow the possibility for the genuine and fully deserved criticism of actual gameplay experience to just be hand-waved away as a personal protest. Or at the other extreme, we risk giving unrelated, off-topic protest the same weight and importance that we would otherwise only give to genuinely justified gameplay criticism. And in an age of internet culture so painfully addicted to only reading the headline, boiling complex topics down to 240 characters or fewer, or, God forbid, a 60-second vertical video, I think it's especially important today, perhaps more than ever, that we make it super clear exactly what we're talking about as quickly and as simply as possible. And this is especially true in fields like game journalism, where the headlines, tweets, or extremely abridged video versions are more often than not all that most gamers are going to see. So, using review bomb to describe both extremes of this spectrum simply doesn't work anymore. But a spectrum is what it is, and things aren't always so black and white. In May 2024, the publishers of breakout bug extermination simulator Helldivers 2, Sony PlayStation, declared that they were going to start enforcing their PlayStation account requirement to play the game. This meant that to continue playing the game on Steam, you now had to log in or create a PlayStation account if you hadn't already done that. Whilst perhaps a real but ultimately minor frustration on its own, this account requirement caused a much bigger issue, because up until that point, Helldivers 2 was available worldwide on Steam, but PlayStation accounts were only available to a comparatively small number of countries. And according to Sony's own terms and conditions, if you made an account for a country other than the one that you were actually playing from, you were ultimately breaking those terms and conditions, giving Sony a right to ban your account. This inarguably negatively affected thousands of people who were effectively having their game deleted from their Steam accounts. And those people could leave negative Steam reviews with obvious justification. But what we actually saw in this instance was over 200,000 negative Steam reviews in a single week, which included those in those affected countries who could no longer play the game without breaking T's and C's. But it also included plenty of people who weren't personally affected by the account requirement, but still wanted to leave a negative review to essentially stand up against a decision that they felt was wrong. In this case, a lot of people leaving negative reviews didn't have their own gameplay experience significantly affected, and a lot of people who would be reading those reviews to decide whether they wanted to buy the game also wouldn't be affected by this change, as the majority would be in countries where they could make a PlayStation account and essentially be unaffected by this decision. This particular anomalous review event lies somewhere awkwardly in between the two extremes that we talked about earlier. Are the negative reviews completely off topic? No, not at all. But they also don't relate to the experience of playing the game itself. At least not for every potential player. And a lot of people can and will continue to play the game unaffected by this change. The Helldivers incident also highlights a fourth dimension of AREs that we didn't consider when we were talking about the first three dimensions. Bandwagoning. Oftentimes, when a review event like this is happening, a lot of people will become aware of it and decide to pile on. These people may very well be leaving a review that is their genuine feelings about the game or the decision that's been made, but they wouldn't have otherwise left that review if it wasn't just to join in on the action. The other side of this behavior is brigading, which is when an individual or group actively encourages people to leave negative reviews. Again, those reviews might accurately reflect the opinions of the people leaving them, but the reviews ultimately wouldn't have been made if not for the encouragement of others. However, those reviews might not reflect the actual opinions of the game, or even be from real accounts at all. Steam as a review platform has the benefit of at least requiring accounts to have purchased the game to leave a review, which does reduce the impact of this particular approach, of course, on Steam specifically. But even then, really determined brigaders could encourage people to buy the game, leave a negative review, and then refund it. And with all of these many dimensions and variations considered, we're still yet to talk about positive anomalous review events. Sure, we typically hear about review bombs when gamers want to highlight a perceived issue, but an update that, say, massively improves the quality of a game could absolutely result in a surge of positive reviews. And then again, on the flip side of that, an out-of-game action, such as a developer making a large charitable donation, can, and has, resulted in a wave of off-topic positive reviews on games. For example, when Ubisoft donated €500,000 to the restoration of Notre Dame after a massive fire in 2019, the game received a massive influx of positive reviews, not commenting on the gameplay, but they were simply there to effectively thank Ubisoft for their donation. So, as it stands, we've got negative reviews and positive reviews. Reviews for objectively game-related reasons, and reviews for objectively out-of-game reasons. Reviews which have been made entirely by individual choice, reviews which have been made with the intent to join in on a trend, and reviews which have been made as part of coordinated action. And sometimes reviews which haven't even been made by individuals at all, but by someone with multiple accounts, or even fake botted accounts. Any and all combinations of these factors are all referred to by just a single two-word phrase: review bomb. Can you see now why that might be a problem? Whilst some might argue Valve are pretty inactive on most important issues, you couldn't really make that argument for their position on review bombs. In 2019, they committed to manually identifying and flagging what they called off-topic review bombs, which they defined as reviews they, quote, consider unrelated to the likelihood that future purchasers will be happy if they buy the game, end quote. But that's off-topic review bombs specifically. So at the same time, they define the phrase review bomb on its own as, quote, a large number of reviews in a short period of time, end quote. For all of the reasons that I've spent the last 10.5 minutes discussing, using that phrase to mean something so broad is asking for trouble, especially when that's just one entity's definition and it's not something that is necessarily widely agreed upon. And if that wasn't bad enough, Valve don't even seem to agree with their own definition. Remember the War Thunder anomalous review event we talked about earlier? The one where a gameplay update was universally hated, so people left reviews saying how they hated it. This is flagged manually by Valve as an off-topic review bomb. If you click to read the negative reviews during this period, you will see that almost every single one is complaining very directly about recent changes to the actual game. Remember, Valve's definition of off-topic review bombs was anything unrelated to the likelihood that future purchasers will be happy if they buy the game. Horrific changes to a game's in-game economy so loathed by the players that the developers actually agreed and then removed those changes is absolutely something which would affect the happiness of future purchasers who buy the game. Yet Valve's manual review has decided that this is off-topic. On the flip side, in January 2024, Resident Evil Revelations received a patch adding DRM to the game, almost 10 years after its initial release, and it received a wave of negative reviews as a result. Valve's FAQ, released alongside their off-topic review bomb definition, states that complaints about DRM are specifically something that they consider off-topic. So, what did they do about all of these? By their very explicit own definition, off-topic reviews? Nothing. There is nothing on this game's Steam page flagging the burst of negative reviews as being off-topic. So here we've got an ARE, objectively on-topic, which Valve have flagged as off-topic, and an ARE, which is by Valve's very own explicit definition, off-topic, which has not been flagged. Now, I don't say this to rag on Valve. I mean, the fact that they're even willing to entertain the idea of manually reviewing AREs is commendable. Instead, I bring this up because I think it perfectly illustrates the very heart of the issue that this entire video is here to discuss. Even well-intentioned people who are actively trying to distinguish between different kinds of what we call review bombs can still get confused themselves and be unintentionally misleading when talking about them, because so many different things are all implied by the use of one single term that is trying to, but can't possibly, describe them all. So let's stop using the same bloody term to describe them. Bombing someone or something clearly implies an attack, right? Do we not all agree that being bombed is not typically something good? For that reason, I think review bombing should be used to describe specifically what Valve has dubbed off-topic review bombs. When people decide to leave a negative review because they've had some beef with the developer or voice actors or other factor unrelated to the actual experience of playing the game, these are also the most noteworthy anomalous review events, and the ones that are getting written and spoken about more often than not anyway. So, applying the already commonly accepted phrase to those events makes the most sense to me. These, let's say, pure review bombs are often accompanied by brigading and bandwagoning, and we already have widely understood internet words to describe these actions, and I just use them. When a review bomb is due to brigading, just say that. We could say that review brigading is a term which coexists with review bombs and isn't mutually exclusive. A game being review bombed can also be review brigaded at the same time. And when there's no apparent group or individual actively organizing the review bomb, but there's reason to believe that people are joining in just for the fun, go ahead and call that a review bomb with review bandwagoning. When a game is updated or changed in some way that it is genuinely a worse experience, and people leave negative reviews as a result, that isn't an attack. You could even argue that is the very reason that reviews exist in the first place. So even on an occasion where all those negative reviews are dropping all at the same time, it's very important to distinguish those times from an actual malicious attack. So I propose a new phrase: a review dump. We all know what it means to take a dump on something, metaphorically that is. So it's already a word understood to mean criticism. But in this instance, we're talking about genuine, actual criticism. So a big old dump of reviews when a developer has damaged their game in some way seems like a pretty appropriate descriptor. This also pairs nicely with what I propose we call the opposite, when there's a high number of positive reviews when a good game update happens. A review bump. The developer has made a positive change to their game and has seen a bump in their review score as a result. This contrasts with positive reviews for non-game related reasons, such as when the studio gets shut down by their mega corporation publisher and gamers want to express sympathy to the developers. We could call this something like review turfing, because it's kind of like astroturfing. Whilst that might sound like quite a negative way to refer to an act which is genuinely kind-spirited in nature, after all, these reviews are intended to show appreciation for the developers. But we do have to acknowledge that this act is still misleading. In other words, it doesn't actually impact the experience of playing the game, which is what most would consider to be the intended use of a game's review section. So I think it's important for an outside person reading those new positive reviews to be aware that they aren't representing an improved experience of playing the game. And all of these new definitions can fit neatly under the umbrella term that we defined earlier in this video, the intentionally neutral anomalous review events. But there's still something important that we haven't really talked about on this video so far. Why people review bomb, dump, bump, and turf in the first place. Most often, I think gamers can feel like they have no real voice. They're just screaming into the void on their social media of choice, and the developers aren't listening. So something very visible and number-based, like reviews, is a simple way to try and get the developers' attention. This is exemplified perfectly by a game some of you might know about called Team Fortress 2. A few years ago, there was a massive campaign involving the entire community, tons of massively popular creators, and even mainstream gaming media coverage, all working together to raise awareness of the game's infestation of hacker bots, which was all just an attempt to get Valve to remember the login to the TF2 Twitter for the first time in 2 years. And that wasn't even enough. The community had to do it again. This time around, whilst the Save TF2 and Fix TF2 movement didn't start out with the intent of organising a review brigading of the game on Steam, people genuinely seemed to organically take to the reviews to dump on the game, to give it genuine negative reviews. Other players noticed this happening, so joined in, which resulted in a review bandwagoning. And then ultimately some review brigading did seem to take place, which again probably amplified the amount of review bandwagoning. And in the end, it actually worked. But whilst the resulting review dump that Team Fortress 2 received was made with the intent to grab the developers' attention about very real issues with the gameplay experience, it would be irresponsible for me to talk this long about review bombs and not mention that off-topic, negative review bombs, the type of anomalous review event that I wholeheartedly agree should retain the title of review bomb, are very often used to troll, disrespect, or otherwise direct hate towards people and ideologies that a vocal subset of the gaming community has decided that they want to hurt. I'm not saying that this is the reason for every review bomb, but the fact remains that review bombs can and are sometimes used as weapons by cruel people whose only objective is to cause distress to others. It's this fact that is a large part of why I made this video in the first place, to emphasize the importance of these simple definitions being made more clear and more distinct from one another, so that we can more easily and clearly point out when an ideological or hate-fueled attack is happening without it getting lost or conflated with other much more benign events like actual game-breaking updates. I hope that by assigning different words to describe things which are fundamentally different things, that this is just one concern that can be addressed. I hope that there's a future where we can read a headline about a game being review bombed and not have to guess whether the developer has liked a tweet from a fringe political figure or whether the game actually has a new update which has made it literally unplayable, or whether the game's lead artist was publicly outed against their will and is now under the attack of internet trolls. Situations so fundamentally different that calling them the same thing is simply irresponsible, if not straight up negligent. Now, I'm not expecting this video to result in the entire gaming industry suddenly adopting brand new language overnight, or really expecting it to change any minds at all. But if I've helped at least one amateur writer to think twice before calling the next botched game update a review bomb in their headline, or even just encouraged one gamer chatting to another to choose their words ever so slightly more carefully next time, then I think I can consider that a job well done. If you enjoyed this but need something more lighthearted as a palate cleanser, why not loop back to the start of this season with 3D platformers that you've never played? And of course, don't forget to subscribe to be the first to know when Season 2 is here.